Here we go again, another alpha behind us and up for review in Albion Online. I played this alpha of Albion Online to the point of loved ones fearing for my safety due to lack of contact. That should be a sign to you that the game's still good, and I have high hopes for the future of Albion Online going into this summer's alpha test and beyond. That being said, I do still have a few gripes. But before I get ahead of myself, let me go over some of the most notable changes in this alpha. Rarity levels have been added to the game. These are different to crafting quality levels in that they're assigned to the resources and the items crafted with them. Rare and uncommon nodes spawn as affixes on standard nodes, usually in the form of a ring of particles. Golden denotes rare and blue denotes uncommon. Rare nodes consume a large amount of durability on the respective tool used to mine them, and award a similarly large amount of fame compared to standard resources. Uncommon nodes are the same, but to a lesser extent. These resources are used to craft specialized equipment pieces that are offshoots of the primary classes you're familiar with from previous tests. Oh, and did I mention there's a shitload of new weapons and combinations? This specialized equipment costs far more to craft than standard issue equipment, and for your trouble, you're given access to a few new skills and combinations. For a flat fee of a few thousand silver, or gold, you or your guild may purchase their own personal instanced island with plots for buildings within a city municipality. These require no daily upkeep. These islands and subsequently the buildings constructed on them are subject to a regional tax rate, which makes them more costly to use than buildings constructed in red zones, and the buildings here that can be constructed on them is limited. What's more is only up to tier 2 resources in very limited quantities can be found there. There are now 4 new types of territories, which all have an abundance of specific resources on them. The downside of claiming these territories is that you receive no defender bonus when being attacked, and will lose the territory as a result of 1 loss in a 5v5 fight. Resource territories can be claimed by guilds, drastically changing the resource gathering dynamic from previous alpha tests, as these territories, like any other, can have their access rights set to lock out any unfriendly players. This makes them a safe haven for gatherers. The first type of resource territory is the forest, which houses, as you might expect, trees, cotton, and a dungeon, which has an assortment of hide-bearing mobs that you can kill and skin. The second is, you guessed it, mines. Here you can find metal and stone, and in the accompanying dungeon you'll find gems. These territories have resources starting at tier 4 running up through tier 7. There's many tier 4 nodes with abundance decreasing respective to the tier being mined. Treasure coves are essentially a cemetery that spawns small stacks of silver at set intervals in several places, but that's not their primary use. These territories have a single dungeon, which is an excellent fame farming spot for lower tier players to gear up in relative safety. The final territory type is a farm, which leads me conveniently into the next major mechanics change. If you've been keeping up with the devlogs or watching the forums at all, you know all about the farming and food system, but for those who haven't, I'll give you a brief overview. Food is now required to maintain territories of all kinds instead of silver. This excludes plots within cities. The amount of food required depends on the type of territory. Silver is now only required for the initial acquisition of land. Farms require less food than resource territories, which require less than plot territories, and so on. Food can be farmed on farm plots found in either farm territories or island instances. With the removal of upkeep paid in silver came some substantial nerfs to silver generation for large organizations. For the better part of this test, there was only one dungeon, the Necropolis, that provided a substantial silver gain for groups running it. This dungeon was the largest dungeon in the game, housing the most powerful monsters in the game, and there was only one of them. A single run of the Necropolis would yield between 750,000 silver and 1.5 million silver, depending on how recently it was cleared. This caused a substantial bottleneck in the silver generation for major guilds aiming to progress. Whichever alliance controlled the dungeon could starve out the competition. The Necropolis was the main fighting ground for medium to large scale fights, as the main powers on the map vied for control of the silver within. There's now personal storage chests that allow you to store whatever you want without fumbling with chests and permissions. These chests are location based. If you lose access to the territory they reside in, you'll also lose access to anything stored within the chests, as it should be. So with the major changes out of the way, let's get into the good and the bad from my perspective in this test. As a disclaimer, this review is given from the perspective of someone who only played in one of the larger alliances on the server, and my perspectives are going to be skewed as such. If you disagree with my opinion, feel free to let me know why below. Towards the middle of the alpha, the size change in buildings following tier 7 was removed, with the exception of the house. This is a good change. As it is now, you still can't fit every production and refining building on a single plot territory, so doubling the size of high-tier buildings just seemed excessive. I like the resource territories, but I feel they need a balance pass before they can be considered acceptable. There's more on this in the bad. I never thought I'd say this about a game that's made for tablets, but this game is actually quite nice to look at. The art department at Sandbox Interactive has done an excellent job to create a stunning aesthetic with clever use of lighting effects and fog. I was really happy to see a much larger variety of class choices in this alpha, and surprisingly a large number of them were actually viable considering how new they were. Casting times and channeling times were added in conjunction with interrupts, making the combat feel a lot more dynamic, and it added a bit more complexity to how skills are used in small-scale combat. To round out the good, without restating what I've already said, the combat in this game is simple and intuitive, but at the same time there's a complexity to it. They've really struck a balance here, and I can't wait to see what's to come. Now with that out of the way, it's time to move on to the bad. The following are my opinions on the current state of the game as it is now, keeping in mind that many things are still to be changed. I like the idea of food to upkeep territories instead of silver. I like the idea of growing animals instead of creating them out of thin air. What I don't like is the way it's implemented currently. As it is, farming consists of pressing a few buttons and then setting a timer for several hours. If you want to plant a crop, you need to go to a farm, click the seeds, click plant, then pay some silver, and then wait for a standard green bar while your character digs a hole and plants them. Following that, it's a waiting game for several hours. Then come time to harvest the crops, you click harvest, and then rinse and repeat. And repeat, and repeat, and repeat, and repeat, and repeat. If you want a horse, the process is much the same, except there's the added step of feeding the horse some food you've previously farmed to grow it. Each piece of food increases its growth timer until you fed it enough to grow fully. Sounds like fun and engaging content? No? Well, here's hoping for some improvement in the future. Refining's a bit of a tough one for me. I understand the need for balance in the refinement of materials, but as it is now, it takes far too long to refine things. As one of the main crafters and refiners for Banished, I spent a huge portion of my game time AFK on as long as 40-minute refine batches. 40 minutes! And this was just tier 4 materials. A single stack of tier 6 takes what seems like an eternity to refine. I couldn't imagine refining multiple stacks at a time. Crafting. In the same vein as refining, it's just too time consuming. A single tier 6 tool takes a full 1 minute and 20 seconds of staring at a slowly progressing green bar. Unfortunately, I don't have any suggestions to mend this problem right now, short of reducing the processing time for these actions. If they must remain so long though, I would at the very least like to see an ability to queue up several crafts and hit a go button and get some coffee. As it is right now, it's just long enough to be really boring, but not quite long enough to get up and walk away. The bad part of resource territories is that it removed a huge conflict driver and a tactic that made the game a much more fun experience in my opinion. With the new safe haven resource territories and the sheer volume of resources contained within them, gripping up to run a few territories over to collect that cache at tier 6 in the northern corner has been all but eliminated, and that makes me sad. Gathering runs were a huge part of previous tests, and using tactics to prevent larger guilds from accessing these caches of resources was a great source of content for smaller guilds. I like the idea of resource territories, but they're far too strong in their current state, and far too much of the resource war has been shifted in controlling silver faucets in 5v5 for resource territories, which I feel discourages smaller groups from venturing into red zones at all because you're unlikely to find juicy, unsuspecting targets anymore. The biggest disappointment for me in the new resource territories is how they completely discourage group play and even encourage solo play within larger organizations. With them being so completely safe and lacking the need to transport resources back to base at regular intervals, 3 or 4 people can easily provide for a guild the size of Banished in terms of raw materials by just camping the resource territories and only transporting goods back to base at low activity times. I won't harp on it too much longer, but I feel like the resource territories really need to be looked at because they've had the unintended side effect of sucking a lot of life out of the open world PvP in red zones. So what's my conclusion for this alpha? It's great. There's something oddly charming about staring at a green bar while I hack away at a node of resources that I know I can use to build a piece of equipment that another player I may never meet can use to create his own tiny empire or destroy someone else's. The PvP is engaging and just complex enough to require some skill and understanding in small gang roams, and it's not too complicated to make large groups of 20 or more impossible to manage effectively. There's still quite a bit of balancing to be done, but I have confidence that those issues will be taken care of. That's what these tests are for. For all the negative points I've made, there's still something that I can't explain that draws me back to Albion every day, and that's saying something. What's more is that Albion's a completely different game from the summer test less than 6 months ago. The rate of change here excites me, and I can't wait to see more from Sandbox Interactive on this title. I'm always skeptical of early access type games, but Albion Online has my full support. If you'd like to jump into Albion Online and catch the next alpha test, consider registering an account and purchasing a Founders Pack using this link and support the developer. Thanks for watching.